The small town sat deep in the hills, where the sun slowly dipped toward the horizon, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The old wooden houses, the empty roads, and the cool air of the late afternoon created a peaceful yet lonely atmosphere. Everything seemed to come to a standstill in the quiet, with no noise except for the gentle breeze and the occasional passing of old cars. This was the town where Lila, a young woman who had recently moved there, found a bit of peace after the hectic days of city life. Lila sat in a small office, her laptop reflecting the pale golden light from the window. She was deeply focused on her work, yet her eyes kept wandering outside, where the town stood still like a painting. She knew she was living in a different world, one that seemed unchanged by time. Everything was too still, making her feel lost, as though she hadn't yet found her place in this world. Suddenly, Lila's gaze was caught by a figure emerging from the street corner across the way. It was Jack. He stood there, silently next to his old car, his messy hair and face marked by deep scars, not just physical, but invisible wounds within his soul. His clothes were worn, his shoes battered, and his eyes seemed to sink into loneliness, as though everything around him had lost meaning. Lila stopped, unable to look away from him. While everyone else in town avoided Jack, she felt a strange emotion rise within her. It wasn't fear, but empathy, as though she could feel the pain he was carrying. Those cold eyes hid a deep sadness, an untold story. Lila took a step forward, feeling compelled to learn more about this mysterious man. She knew there was something special about Jack, and it was that very thing that kept her from turning away. The entire space seemed to freeze, with only a thin barrier between them, two strangers, yet living in two completely different worlds. The next morning, Lila woke up early, sensing that something was about to happen. She left her house and walked along the quiet road, the thin mist still lingering on the grass. The stillness in the air and the old houses along the road seemed to be asleep, resting in their peaceful silence. She didn't know exactly what she was searching for, but there was a strong urge within her to find Jack, to approach him once more. After passing through the small streets, Lila finally saw him. Jack was sitting alone against the brick wall of a cafe that hardly anyone visited. He was smoking, his breath shaky, his eyes distant, as though lost in his own thoughts. The space around them was so quiet, only the sound of the wind and small noises from the street. Lila watched him for a while, her heart suddenly uneasy. She wasn't sure how to start, whether she should approach him, or if he even wanted to talk to her. But then she decided, it was the right decision. She would approach him. Not out of curiosity or fear, but out of a strange feeling, empathy. Something she had never felt so clearly before. Lila stepped closer and gently said, "Hello." She wasn't in a rush. Just a simple greeting, enough to ease the awkward tension. Jack looked up, his eyes briefly showing surprise when he saw her. He furrowed his brows, as though trying to remember who she was. Lila smiled softly and sat down next to him, saying nothing, just sharing the stillness of the moment. She didn't force anything, didn't ask about his past or the wounds he carried. Just let him feel that she was there, ready to listen if he ever wanted to talk. They both sat in silence for a long time. Jack smoked, his gaze drifting far away, as if facing an endless sadness, unsure of how to confront it. But Lila didn't mind the silence. She sat beside him, as if there were no distance between them, only her presence and her eyes, looking at him with all the compassion she had. After a while, Lila spoke up. "You live alone, don't you? Just like me. I just moved here." Her words were simple, not special, but they opened a door, inviting Jack to step through. He looked up at her, then turned away, his eyes unfamiliar but softened somehow. "Yeah," Jack replied, his voice rough, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "I live alone. I'm used to it." Lila didn't press further. She knew that in this silence, both of them could find a bit of peace. And sure enough, in the days that followed, Lila began to meet Jack more frequently. Every morning, she would go to the cafe and find him sitting in his usual spot, where he was always alone, in a quiet solitude undisturbed by anyone. She didn't start with big conversations, but simply sat next to him, drinking coffee, in silence. or sometimes, sharing small stories about her life, her dreams, and the plans she once had. One day, when she saw Jack no longer smoking, she realized something had changed in him. The tough, closed-off exterior was slowly breaking down. Each time she got closer, he no longer stayed silent as he did before. He began to open up, though with some hesitation, but at least, he didn't push her away anymore. One day, in a conversation, Jack shared his past with Lila, about his days fighting on the front lines, the scars he carried not just on his body but in his soul. He spoke about the comrades who had died, about the pain he could never share with anyone. Those memories, those wounds, kept him from reintegrating into the world. He didn't know how to face his past. To them, "I'm just a retired soldier," Jack said, his voice sad. "No one cares about me. No one understands what I've been through." He chuckled, but it was a bitter laugh. Lila listened in silence, her heart aching. She couldn't fully understand everything he had gone through, but she knew that the wounds of the soul were much harder to heal than physical scars. She couldn't change his past, but she could help him find hope in life again, in the people around him. Their relationship continued to grow, slowly but steadily, without rushing, but full of understanding. Lila didn't force him to open up right away. She just quietly stood by his side, supporting him during his hardest moments. Over the following days, they talked, shared joys and sorrows. She knew love didn't come quickly, but the empathy, patience, and presence she offered were the only things he needed right now. One day, when Jack softly said, "You're really different. Thank you for not giving up on me," Lila's heart swelled with emotion. She didn't need promises or immediate changes. She just needed to know that, day by day, they were getting closer, overcoming the old wounds, and building a genuine, hopeful relationship. In the days that followed, Lila and Jack continued to meet every morning at the little cafe, where the soft light of dawn filtered through the windows. They grew closer, but Lila couldn't help noticing the hesitation in Jack's eyes whenever she brought up topics about the future, about dreams that he always seemed to avoid facing. She knew that he still carried unhealed wounds, painful things he couldn't express. However, in her heart, she always held on to the belief that one day, he would find a way to confront his past and rediscover himself. But change was not as easy as she had hoped. This town, although small and peaceful, still carried strong prejudices about people like Jack. Everyone knew he was a veteran, but no one really cared about what he had been through. They only saw a lonely man, tired and unable to fit back into ordinary life. The cold looks from neighbors, the small talk that excluded him, all of it made Jack feel like he was an outsider in this community. That scene repeated itself one afternoon during a community meeting at the town hall. The topic of the meeting was planning the town's annual festival, but unexpectedly, it turned into a discussion about people like Jack, veterans who had returned to live in silence. Throughout the meeting, townspeople debated whether they should allow veterans like Jack to participate in the festival, suggesting that their presence would only cause more division and ruin the atmosphere of the event. Lila couldn't sit still when she heard those words. She saw Jack at the back of the room, his face still cold, but his eyes filled with a deep sadness. He didn't say anything, just quietly listened to the constant criticism directed at him. The others in town may not have understood him, but Lila couldn't accept this injustice. She stood up, cutting through the noisy debate with a determined gaze. "You can't just judge him by his past and treat him like this," Lila said, her voice not loud but strong enough to make the room fall silent. "Jack served this country. He's not a burden. He's a human being, and he deserves to be respected just like anyone else in this town." The room fell silent for a moment. All eyes turned toward her. Some people looked displeased, while others muttered in response. But Lila didn't let that stop her. She turned to look at Jack, who stood up and walked out of the room, his posture weary. No one in the room dared speak again. After the meeting, Lila went after Jack. He was standing outside the office, his eyes lost in the view of the houses, as if trying to escape everything around him. She walked up to him. But this time, Jack didn't look at her. He simply spoke, his voice low and sad. "Thank you, but you don't understand." Lila didn't respond immediately. She just stood beside him, letting the silence between them not become a wall. After a moment, she spoke. I know you can't change everything right away. But if you don't start believing in yourself, how can others believe in you? Jack turned to look at her. For the first time, his eyes were not cold. There was something in them. Something had shifted, even if it was very small. He didn't speak, but Lila knew it meant something significant to him. She also understood that this was just the first step in the long journey they had ahead. Things began to change when Lila decided that she wouldn't just stand up for Jack in meetings like this. She began to help him connect with the people in the town. Even though not everyone accepted him right away, she encouraged him to participate in small community activities, like fixing broken equipment at the town hall or assisting with local projects. While many people still remained indifferent or dismissive, gradually, Jack began to receive some respect from a few. The community couldn't change overnight, but with every small step Jack took, every effort Lila made, he started to realize that he wasn't an outsider. A soldier who fought didn't deserve to be forgotten, but rather to find a part of himself in this world. And maybe, with Lila by his side, he would find a new path, no matter how difficult it might be. Finally, Jack's change didn't just impact himself, it began to shake the prejudices within the community. Although the road ahead was still long and full of challenges, at least Jack no longer felt like he was unnecessary. He had begun to understand that in his loneliness, there was still a flicker of hope that had never gone out. One weekend, as the small town was preparing for the summer festival, tensions within the community flared up once again. Although peaceful, the town was still controlled by long-held prejudices, with many looking at people like Jack with suspicion. However, this time, the situation went too far. It all started when a group of people in the town, including some members of the council, proposed that veterans like Jack, those who no longer participated in any community activities, should not be allowed to take part in this year's festival. They argued that the presence of veterans would only increase division and spoil the festival's atmosphere. When this information came to light, Lila felt as though she had been hit by a heavy blow. She couldn't accept that this community, after all they had been through, was still turning its back on those who had given so much for the country. Disappointment surged within her, but she knew that if she didn't speak up, no one else would. She decided she had to confront this injustice once again. And this time, she couldn't look the other way. The next day, Lila went to find Jack. He was sitting in the old cafe, looking up at her with a blank expression. Lila knew that, with Jack, everything was still too early, and he was still skeptical of her help. But this time, she couldn't hesitate anymore. She sat down and, without waiting for him to say anything, went straight to the point. Jack, I can't let this happen. This town cannot keep pushing people like you away. Do you know what they've decided? Jack didn't respond, silently smoking his cigarette. He didn't want to get involved in pointless arguments. Didn't want to revisit the pain of his past. But Lila couldn't give up. She looked directly at him with a firm gaze. You can't ignore this anymore. It's not just about you, it's about all of us. What you've been through, we need to understand it, not push you away. Jack turned his head, avoiding her gaze, but there was something in his eyes that told Lila the silence wasn't a rejection. Jack had been a soldier, and like every soldier, he knew how to fight not just for himself, but for the things he believed in. Lila saw a spark in his eyes. A strange feeling rose in her chest. Jack didn't speak, but she knew he was ready to stand up. What do you want me to do? Finally, Jack spoke, his voice hoarse. Lila smiled, her heart steady. Stand up, Jack, I know you can. You've fought for things greater than yourself. And I believe that if you stand up now, the whole town will have to listen. Neither of them spoke again. But the change in Jack was so clear that Lila felt relieved. Finally, Jack had agreed to face the community alongside her. But they both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The barriers were still there, and no one would stand with them except for those who truly understood them. But at least now, they had each other. That evening, the community meeting was held, with everyone from the town present. When Lila walked in, all eyes turned to her, and then to Jack, who entered after her. The room fell silent. No one dared speak. but the suffocating atmosphere made Lila feel the tension in the air. She walked up to the stage and looked around at everyone in the room. Every face showed confusion, judgment, or rejection, but no one stood up to defend Jack. "What are you doing?" Lila asked, her voice firm yet full of emotion. "Jack is someone who fought for this country. He's not a burden. We all have a responsibility to him. Without people like Jack, we wouldn't have the peaceful lives we do today. And yet, you want to reject him just because he can't fit back into this life? He sacrificed so much, and now all he wants is to find his place in this society. A place where he doesn't have to feel like an outsider." The room remained silent, but Lila's words reached the hearts of many. After a long and tense silence, one of the council members stood up. It was an older woman, someone who had once been Jack's comrade during their military days. She stood with a determined look. "I agree with her," she said. "We can't keep living in the past and holding on to these prejudices. Jack is one of us, and we have a responsibility to help him feel valued, just like anyone else." The atmosphere in the room began to change. Some people stood up and started offering support, though a few remained unconvinced. Lila knew that this battle had at least entered the early stages of change. Jack was no longer standing alone. When the meeting ended, Jack walked out, not looking at anyone, but Lila knew that, deep down, a small flame had begun to burn inside him. This time, he no longer felt like an outsider. They both walked out together, into the quiet of the town. But in their hearts, they carried a new sense of hope, that they would continue to fight together. Not just for themselves but for those who had been forgotten. In the end, after that meeting, things no longer felt the same. The people in the town started to look at each other differently. And gradually, a change in their thinking began to take shape. Although they couldn't erase all the prejudices and barriers right away, at least they began to open up more to Jack. And it was Jack, along with Lila, who had created a major turning point in their own lives. In the days that followed, Jack started participating more in community activities. He was no longer just the silent man sitting in the corner of the cafe or staying home with his war memories. Lila continued to stand by him, encouraging and walking alongside him every step of the way. Together, they worked to rebuild parts of the town, from fixing up deteriorating areas to organizing community gatherings where people could get to know each other better. Jack slowly started to open up, sharing his past, but not just as a story of pain. It became a story of values. Lessons he learned from war and life. One day, while they were standing at the town center, where everyone was busy planting trees and decorating for the festival, Lila realized that she had helped Jack change not only in his thoughts but in how he saw himself. Before, Jack had always felt like he was an extra part of society. A person with no value other than his scars and his war past. But now, he was beginning to feel like a part of this community. Someone who could contribute, share, and create good things for the people around him. "Thank you," Jack said, looking straight into Lila's eyes, filled with gratitude. "If it weren't for you, I might still be stuck in my darkness." Lila smiled, her eyes warm with empathy. "You don't need to thank me, Jack. All I did was believe in you. And I'm so proud that you didn't give up." Those words warmed Jack's heart. He had once thought he couldn't change, that he couldn't be loved or accepted. But now he knew that love, patience, and empathy could create miracles. Together, they had overcome challenges, the doubtful stares of others. And most importantly, they had overcome themselves. Jack was no longer a soldier fighting in a war. He was a man who had learned to love and live true to himself. With the community's support, Lila and Jack decided to launch an important project, a center to support veterans and people in difficult situations. This center wouldn't just be a place for people like Jack to find comfort, but also a symbol of change, acceptance, and healing. They worked together to plan, seek funding, and organize events to raise money. It wasn't an easy task, but they both understood that it was something they had to do, not just for those who had sacrificed, but for themselves as well. In the months that followed, the center began its operations. Though initially, there weren't many people coming in. Slowly but surely, more veterans and people in difficult situations began to find their way there. Sharing and seeking support, The community also began to recognize the value of the center. And those who had once doubted Jack now started to offer their full support. One day, when the center hosted a ceremony for the veterans, Lila and Jack stood together, watching the people gathering around. The looks in their eyes had changed. What used to be judgment now had transformed into respect and empathy. This was a moment that Lila knew they had done something important, not just for themselves, but for everyone else. When the ceremony ended, Jack turned to Lila and took her hand.